Confirmation of minutes.
Mr. Speaker, my sincere apologies, if you allow me, on the item obituary and congratulatory remarks. Would I be allowed to go back to that?
Yes, 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 proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I want to very briefly stand, well, good morning. On this first, I stand to extend congratulations on our many athletes who performed great exception at the recently concluded Character Games in the Bahamas. Our athletes no doubt demonstrated their abilities, and with these young people, I'm assured that the future of athletics in Dominica has great promise. I also want to congratulate the 130 athletes and officials who were selected to perform in the fourth Alba Games that are currently being held in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. It is a game that has extended participation to a wide cross-section of our society, from dominoes to basketball, etc., and to several people who otherwise would never have had the opportunity to be part of international competition have been able to travel to Venezuela and are now representing Dominica at those games. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I wish to place on the records of the Parliament our condolences to the family of the late Dr. Alwyn Booley, who passed away some weeks ago and who was bestowed the privilege of an official funeral by the government. I believe that the country extended a very dignified send-off to Dr. Booley, and we're happy to be there in person to witness this. It speaks to his contribution, reflected the contribution that he made to our country. But I believe, Mr. Speaker, going forward, in a broader sense, that the country, we may need to look at how we recognize people like Dr. Bully and others who have made sterling contributions to our country. And how do we recognize them, really? And I think we need to quite possibly look at the possibility of recognizing national heroes. Those who assisted with the emancipation of our ancestors here, those who defended the existence of the Kalanago brothers and sisters, and who defended the patrimony of our country. And so very soon, I believe the government will put a mechanism in place so that it can be advised on how do we go about approaching this very important national subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to join the Prime Minister in congratulating our athletes who participate in the Carifta Games and those who are now participating in the Alba Games. But I also wish to add another athlete, and that is Alec Afanaz of Grand Bay, who, as I mentioned last sitting, that he will get picked on the West Indies team. So I want to congratulate him on that achievement and to give him the assurance, as well as the cricketers, especially the Colts team of Grand Bay, is performing very well, that we will memorialize his achievement by ensuring that the Geneva playing field becomes a symbol of his achievement to date. And we look forward to him making us proud, continue to make us proud as he performs on the West Indies team. And we look forward to welcoming him home soon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Morning, Mr. Speaker, and this honorable House. I also like to send some congratulatory report on the athletes, especially coming from our constituency. The only gold medal from the character game came from Mr. Addison James. And I know for sure he will bring home lots more medals. And it's a sad but unfortunate situation that his aunt passed a few minutes after him winning gold medal. May her soul rest in peace. She was also a past village council secretary. So we'll have to give her a little bit of encouragement to continue his sportsmanship and carry on this legacy for his family and also to represent Dominica to the highest level. Thank you.
I myself would like to congratulate our athletes. To be remiss of me as a former national athlete not to really put my congratulatory remarks on record. For us Dominicans, I think it's a proud moment. So we also want to commend and congratulate our athletes for the Alba Games also. And to the family of Mr. Dr. Boli, we extend our sympathy and do it, although the Prime Minister have said it, but for the entire Parliament, we want to extend on the record our condolences.
Confirmation of minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the minutes of the meeting Tuesday 7th and Wednesday 8th February 2023 be confirmed as circulated.
Second. It has been moved and seconded that the minutes of the meeting of Tuesday 7th and Wednesday 8th February 2023 be adopted as circulated. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The minutes is adopted.
Announcements by Speaker.
I received two correspondence one from Honorable Greta Roberts, who has asked leave permission to be absent. So permission is granted. She's on official government duty. And also I received one from Honorable Lockhart Hippolyte. Also, she's on official business, so permission is granted. Let's proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at a later stage of the proceedings, I will be taking all three stages of the bills shortly entitled Status of Children Act 2023, Maintenance of Children Act 2023, and Children Care and Adoption Act 2023, standing in the name of the Honorable Minister of Health and Social Services on the order paper.
Mr. Speaker, I seek your permission to move.
And granted.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at a later stage of the proceedings, I will be taking all three stages of the bills shortly entitled Maintenance Act 2023 and Domestic Violence Act, standing in the name under other people.
Statement by ministers.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled Status of Children Act 2023 be read a first time.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
The bill has been read the first time.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled Maintenance of Children Act 2023 be read a first time.
On that line. The bill has been read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled Children, Care and Adoption Act 2023 be read a first time.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
The bill has been read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled Maintenance Act 2023 be read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, seconded.
Maintenance Act 2023.
The bill has been read the first time.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled Domestic Violence Act 2023 be read the first time.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
The bill has been read the first time.
I move the second reading of the bill shortly entitled Status of Children Act 2023.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
The bills being tabled before the House today are as follows. The Status of Children Bill, Children, Care and Adoption Bill, Maintenance of Children Bill, Maintenance of Spouses and Parents Bill, Domestic Violence Bill. The OECS Commission, in partnership with the Office of the Attorney General, has played an integral role in shaping the various bills before the Parliament, geared at reform of legislation. This is extremely important to consider as the legislative agenda of any nation requires the enactment of new legislation as well as the reform of legislation. The 5 bills which are presented here today all relate to the family and should most importantly be viewed as legislative reform. Fundamentally, the bills are meant to uphold human rights as enshrined in the Constitution and compliance to Dominica's obligations, having ratified United Nations conventions like the Convention on the Rights of the Child and other United Nations treaties, which generally emphasize human rights and fundamental freedoms. It is important to note that there are critical benefits for Dominica in the reform of our family laws, to include 1, increase the capacity of our judicial and legal system in addressing issues surrounding women, children, and the family as a whole, thereby enhancing the administration of law and quality of justice. For example, the various provisions of the bill clearly gives guidance to the court in making relevant orders. Number two, to strengthen institutional capacity by creating a climate that would facilitate greater access to justice by resolving matters related to the family and particularly children in a more holistic manner. And we're talking here about the restructuring of the welfare division and the establishment of a special unit within the police force to handle matters. The journey that has brought us to this stage started over 10 years ago with the introduction of the OECS Family Law and Domestic Violence Reform Initiative, with the expressed purpose of harmonizing certain existing laws and reforming the justice system to deal with family and domestic violence issues. Such an initiative resulted in the drafting of the 4 of 5 mentioned bills by the OECS Legal Reform Unit, whilst the Maintenance of Spouses and Parents Bill was drafted by the Office of the Attorney General. I wish for the benefit of the House to make it clear that before us are harmonized bills, which when enacted would coexist with legislation in the other OECS states, some of which have already met approval in those jurisdictions. This means, for example, Antigua would have among its statutes a Children Care and Adoption Act, which likely minor changes with what we are about to enact. This has certain benefits as a Dominican child residing or visiting Antigua who encounters difficult circumstances which require the intervention of the court would have the same guarantees in law as in the case of a child here in Dominica. Before the drafting of the bills, consultations were held in the respective states, including Dominica, in order to gather stakeholder views on the reform of family laws, which in most instances are outdated. Stakeholders included members of the judiciary, law enforcement, social workers, children, and individuals from civil society. The drafting of the bill subsequently ensued and were presented to the respective OECS states, including Dominica, for consideration. Even then, further consultation and public education on the draft bills were held here in Dominica in order to seek opinions on those drafts to ensure that a cross-section of citizens are familiar with their provisions and make recommendations for possible changes. Among those engaged were persons who would be involved in the enforcement of the laws, like the police, employees of the Social Welfare Division, members of the judiciary, and generally other individuals in society. The government of Dominica has devoted significant time and attention to the development of the family model bills, which includes the Status of Children Bill. The purpose of the Status of Children Bill is clearly articulated in its long title, that is, to provide for the equal status of children and to remove all discriminatory provisions in the laws relating to a child born out of wedlock. Mr. Speaker, clauses 1 to 3 of the bill provide the preliminary and interpretation provisions. By virtue of clause 3, the bill applies to a child whether or not the child was born in Dominica, was born before the commencement of the act, or the parents of the child have ever been domiciled in Dominica. Part 1, Status of Children, clauses 4 to 8 of the bill provides for the determination of the relationship between a child and his or her parents. Clause 4.1 provides that all distinctions that exist as a result of the marital status of the parents of a child shall be abolished. Mr. Speaker, it is instructive to know that when the bill becomes law, Dominica would for the first time have a Status of Children Act to provide for the equal status of children, and to remove all discriminatory provisions in the laws relating to a child born out of wedlock. Fathers are to be given equal rights upon establishment of paternity and therefore parental obligations in respect of the child. Importantly, Mr. Speaker, the idea of a legitimate and illegitimate, lawful or unlawful child or children referred to as a bastard will not be recognized in the law. In fact, from the commencement of the new Act, the legal distinction in the status of children born within and outside of marriage would be abolished, and all children shall be of equal status. Clause 5.2 provides that where circumstances exist that give rise to presumptions of paternity in respect of more than one father, no presumption shall be made with respect to paternity. Mr. Speaker, Part 2, Parentage, Clauses 9 to 15 of the bill makes provision for the declaration of parentage. Clause 10 provides for instances in which a declaration of parentage may be made to the court. It provides that a person who alleges that a named person is in the parent of a child, alleges that the relationship of a father and child exists between that person and any other named person, alleges that the relationship of mother and child exists between that person and any other named person, or having a proper interest in the result, wishes to have it determined whether the relationship of parent and child exists between two named persons. It may apply to the court for declaration with respect to the same. Clause 11 provides for the medical procedures to be used to determine parentage and states that the court may, on the request of a party to the proceedings, or on the request of a person representing the child, or of its own motion, make an order requiring a testing procedure to be carried out in relation to a person who applied to the court for a declaration. Clause 12 states the matters to be taken into account by the court when making a determination under Clause 11, and the court may, if it considers that to do so would be in the best interest of the child, appoint a fit and proper person to act as the litigation guardian of the child. Clause 13 provides for reports with respect to any parentage testing carried out pursuant to the bill. Clause 14 provides for the approval of laboratories to undertake parentage testing procedures. Clause 15 provides that once paternity is established, the father of a child born out of wedlock shall be, along with the mother of such child, a joint guardian of that child and be entitled to exercise parental rights over that child jointly with the mother. Mr. Speaker, Part 3, Disposition of Property, Clauses 16 to 18 of the bill provide for the disposition of property before and after the commencement of the Act, for which this is the bill. Clause 17 provides that for the purposes of administration or distribution of an estate or property, an executor, administrator, or trustee of an estate or property shall, whenever it is material in the circumstances, make honest and reasonable inquiries as to the existence of any person who could claim an interest in the estate or property by reasons only of the provisions of the bill. Clause 18 seeks to protect an executor, administrator, or trustee from an action being taken against them by a person who could claim an interest in property by virtue of the provisions of the bill, where that executor, administrator, or trustee had no notice of the relationship on which the claim is based at the time when the distribution of the estate or property was made. Part 4, miscellaneous, clauses 19 to 23, contain general provisions relating to hearings, existing rights, regulation, and repeal. Clause 19 provides for the conduct of hearings. Clause 26 to protect rights acquired prior to the commencement of the bill. Clause 21 gives the minister responsible for the administration of the bill the power to make regulations. Clause 23 provides for the interpretation of the existing law in giving effect to the bill. Mr. Speaker, at present, the only law which is somehow closely associated with the status of a child is the Legitimation Act, which relates to children born out of wedlock and particularly speaks to rights and legitimated persons to take interest in property. It also addresses entitlement of an illegitimate child and the mother of an illegitimate child to succession in real or personal property in cases of intestacy of the other. This existing act in no way fully addresses matters related to the legal status of children. Mr. Speaker, the Status of Children Bill, therefore, seeks to address the existing deficiencies and gaps in the present Act. The Status of Children Bill seeks to regularize and legitimize the status of children in Dominica as relates to determination of relationship, presumptions of paternity, determination of paternity upon void of marriage, and presumptions where a child is born as a result of artificial conception procedures. Mr. Speaker, this bill is affiliated to 2 United Nations conventions to which Dominica is a signatory. Here reference is made to the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. Enacting this new law is therefore a strong demonstration of Dominica's commitment and compliance to those conventions. In fact, the CRC in Article 2.1 states that states parties shall respect and ensure the rights set forth in the present convention to each child within their jurisdiction, without discrimination of any kind, irrespective of the child's or his or her parents' or legal guardian's race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national, ethnic or social origin, property, disability, birth, or other status. The convention therefore assumes no discrimination between a child born in or out of wedlock, and there is no discrimination between the rights of parents in relation to such a child. It further supports the view that a child should have the right of contact with both parents, regardless of whether or not they are married or whether they are living together or apart. The objective of this piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, is through the various provisions of the new law, better to protect many children who are usually born out of wedlock. It therefore seeks to address the matter of determination of a relationship between a child and his or her parents, presumptions of paternity, recognition of paternity for purposes of succession, declaration of parentage, and parentage testing procedures, which addresses DNA testing. Discussion has intensified in regards to certain policies associated with this and the other bills. One example is in relation to DNA testing and official recognition of laboratories for DNA testing as directed under the bill. Mr. Speaker, this is but a mere summary of this important measure. The Status of Children Act would place our children in a more favorable position in the eyes of the law. Based on the proposals contained within, a legitimized child becomes the legal offspring of a father and the natural mother for all purposes, including inheritance. and importantly, obligation for child support and providing for the child in other respects. We can all agree that legitimization and paternity are extremely sensitive and important issues for all families. This new law will hopefully provide families with peace of mind and give children a sense of security, which will augur well for their futures, their claim to their family name and family fortune, and importantly, for their status within our society. I am proud to be part of a government which has taken the progressive step towards the creation of a more structured legislative system to protect the rights of our children. As the Minister with responsibility for senior security, children at risk, gender affairs, and differently abled, I feel a special sense of pride that these measures have been formulated and are now before the House for approval. With these words, Mr. Speaker, I commend the bill to the Honorable House.
The bill is before the House for debate.
Do you recognize me?
Yes, I recognize you, Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr.
You may
Speaker,
proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to first of all, if you allow me, to recognize the sincere and consistent advocacy of what we're doing here today by people such as Honorable Alex Boyd Knight, Mr. Martin Anthony, Miss Gloria Augustus, and my deceased friend, Eva McIntyre. I wish to say to Mr. Martin Anthony and Miss Gloria Augustus that the state shall recognize you on November 3rd for your contribution to the children of the country. Miss Honorable Alex Boyd Knight has been a champion inside and outside of the courts for the rights of children and women across the board. Mr. Speaker, the bills before the House represent this government's long-standing policy of providing care, protection, and security for all our citizens. It is based, Mr. Speaker, on our commitment to ensure that we protect the rights and responsibilities of all families across the spectrum of our society. This DLP-led government, Mr. Speaker, has a proud record of social protection. I refer to the set of policies and programs developed and implemented by this administration aimed at reducing the social and economic risk and vulnerabilities of citizens and enhancing their capacity to protect themselves and enjoy a high degree of comfort and dignity. Whether, Mr. Speaker, is the eradication of pit latrines, whether it's the construction of homes and provision of housing assistance, whether it's access to pipe-borne water and electricity, whether it's free transportation to students attending secondary school across Dominica, free medical care for people 18 and younger and 60 and over, the allowance for people who do not qualify for pensions from 65 years and upwards. The list goes on, Mr. Speaker. These are some of the programs: the regularization of squatters, bringing a sense of dignity and pride and independence to our citizens across the board. So our comprehensive social protection system covers all segments of vulnerable people, including the unemployed, disabled, sick, aged, single parents, and children. Similarly, Mr. Speaker, The bills before the Parliament meet our objectives to create fair and equitable systems in which all citizens are accounted for and their rights prioritized. I believe, Mr. Speaker, this is a red letter day for people in our country, especially the vulnerable. The series of laws, therefore, offers protections for spouses in divorce, parents and grandparents unable to care for themselves, children who are abused and neglected, and victims of domestic violence. By bringing these measures to the Parliament, we are, as a government, demonstrating our seriousness about the protection of our children, women, and elderly, whose rights are most often trampled upon. Recognizing that strong family units must exist for societies to thrive, we have provided the structure to help family members navigate the legal issues of family life by setting out their rights and responsibilities to each other, as well as providing a framework for resolving disputes through court mediation. Importantly, Mr. Speaker, the legislation we are proposing provides guidance on the provision of care and security for all our children so that they are assured more hopeful futures. In respect to the status of children bill that is now before us, and I want to commend the Minister for her presentation. The Status of Children Act in the Commonwealth of Dominica aims to establish equal rights for all children, regardless of their parents or the parents' marital status. In simple terms, the law is concerned with the rights of children to take interest in property and addresses the entitlements of a child born outside of a marriage. It legitimizes children, Mr. Speaker, ensuring that the issue of paternity is not held over their heads as a disqualifying factor in matters of succession. In essence, the law eliminates the disheartening and often cruel discrimination that many of us have had to contend with due to the cultural and societal norms of our small Caribbean societies. Many of us are familiar with the discrimination I speak of, Mr. Speaker, which has for generations followed children in Dominica, whom we like to refer to as outside children. In fact, several of us here may be all too familiar with what it means to be an outside child, looked down upon and made to feel less than, and in many cases ostracized by our very sisters and brothers who were fortunate to be born as legitimate heirs of our fathers. These situations form the genesis of this bill. This is the genesis of the bill, and we're seeking to correct a historical and generational wrong in our society, Mr. Speaker. And from today, this will come to an end in the Commonwealth of Dominica. The proposed bill insists that under our laws, our children should be equal and able to economic benefits of equal status. The bill is forward-thinking, and I dare say, Mr. Speaker, groundbreaking. In its intent, it will overturn long-standing prejudices in our society, which have often crippled our citizens' ability to claim their rightful places within families and communities. I must note that a very key aspect of the bill's forward-thinking approach is its consideration of children born through artificial conception procedures, as is dealt with, I believe, in Clause 8 of the bill. As modern reproductive technologies advance, our laws must evolve to accommodate these changes and ensure that all children, regardless of their circumstances the circumstances of their conception, are treated fairly and have equal rights and protections under the laws of the Commonwealth of Dominica. I believe, therefore, that the Status of Children Act is a progressive and necessary piece of legislation which will address the needs of children in parentage disputes while promoting transparency and fairness in the legal process. As a government, Mr. Speaker, we have a duty. And as a nation, we have an obligation. And we embrace that responsibility as a government to consider the well-being and rights of our children in all aspects of our decision making. And Mr. Speaker, as I've said publicly, this is an aspect of when we speak about the national reset, ensuring that the society becomes a more caring society, that each of us in the society takes on our responsibilities in accordance with the Constitution and the laws of the country, and that we truly display what it means to be our neighbor's keeper. The bill empowers us, Mr. Speaker, to address the issue of discrimination against children. And may our God be pleased with our efforts. Thank you.
Senator Paris, proceed.
Mr. Speaker, other members of the Parliament, I rise to make some brief contributions on the bill that is currently before the House for debate. Firstly, Mr. Speaker, let me congratulate the administration for such a timely piece of legislation. Also, Mr. Speaker, I would like to beg for your permission to refer to my notes from time to time.
Permission granted.
Thank you. Was it a timely piece of legislation that looks towards securing the future of this beautiful nature isle? As remarked by the Honorable Prime Minister, a lot of children, many of us who are here in the hearing of these presentations, have been victims and have suffered from the lack of legislations like these in the past. And it is important, Mr. Speaker, to recognize the initiative to have these issues regularized, ensuring that children in Dominica, like the minister said, even those who are not born here and other issues surrounding that, will have legal status, will have not just legal, but equal status across the board. That is something worth commending, because that is what helps to secure the future of this great country that we have grown to love. It is an important step towards building a fairer and more inclusive society that recognizes the dignity and the worth of every child. Mr. Speaker, the good book that we read and we fashion our lives after remarks that children are a heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. This piece of legislation is a demonstration that we are good people of good Christian conscience, and we don't only want to recognize and show gratitude to the Almighty during our times of worship, but we want our legislation to also reflect our gratitude to God for the rewards that he has given to us in our children. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, it will take a tremendous amount of private and public sector support from the relevant organizations to improve our collective outlook on these issues, as opposed to simply depending on legislation to tell us how we should treat our children, or that every child should be treated equally. As expected, Mr. Speaker, there will be individuals and groups of people who will have some oppositions to this type of legislation, and that is simply because of their traditional beliefs that children born out of wedlock somehow don't have the same rights as children who are born in wedlock, as if there is some separate process that happens to make those children come about. So, Mr. Speaker, it is important for us to recognize that it is going to take a lot of private sector support from the churches and other religious organizations to assist our families and our people in elevating our approach to these issues. Our guidance counselors, our police, the welfare organizations need to be given adequate support both from the administration and from the community to ensure that when we're dealing with these social issues, that they're dealt with adequately. Mr. Speaker, it is important to note that the legislation will not or may not be able to adequately address the issues of the social stigmas that will for some time continue to rest on these children. So, like we've heard, it is going to take a community. It's going to take the community effort to ensure that while we have legal redress in some cases, or in most cases, that the things that we can't take people to court for as it relates to stigmas and discrimination against children, that they are addressed. And all of us put all our hands on deck to make sure that we protect and respect the rights of our children. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to need some help with this, and maybe Honorable Frederick may be able to give me some help with that later. But there are a group of children who have a specific type of vulnerability. And while the bill speaks to discrimination against all children, our Kalinago children have a different and a unique type of vulnerability that I'm not sure the bill adequately addresses. But then again, I may need some help with that, and I'm open to learning. But they, a group of people who have different ethnic background and a different social status and vulnerability, they too are going to need a special type of protection. These children, over the years, who have grown up to be significant contributors to our environment, against the odds that they have had to endure, continue to thrive in our nation and contribute. And I think we owe it to them to make special recognition for the vulnerabilities that we know that they have. Mr. Speaker, it is very heartwarming to see this type of legislation and to know that we have good conscience, people of good Christian conscience, are moving away from discriminatory practices that we may have been aligned with in the past, or that may have been ascribed to us, or maybe accused of. It is very good that this bill is now demonstrating that we are moving away from that type of behavior. It demonstrates that we as leaders in the island of Dominica are prepared the same way as we're asking men and women, people of this country, to recognize every one of their children connected with them, to recognize them equally. That we ourselves are prepared to recognize all of Dominica's children just as equally. without prejudice, without bias, without discrimination, demonstrating that we are prepared to uphold the spirit of this legislation. So, Mr. Speaker, no longer will any of Dominica's children be able to see that they weren't able to access government assisted programs, whether scholarships or funding for small business or anything of the matter.
Point of clarification. Oh, objection. Relevance to the bill.
So you stand on a point of order in terms of relevance. Yes. Yes, Senator. The Honorable Minister was asking in terms of the relevance. I was concerned about it, but I gave you a chance. So just go back on track and focus on the bill.
The relevance of this part of the debate, Mr. Speaker, is to demonstrate that all Dominica's children are equal. The same way that children born in and out of wedlock are now equal and are legally entitled to access to the resources of their parents. Yeah?
Yes, we recognize that, but in regards to the bill, so focus on the
So,
bill.
Mr. Speaker, we're only demonstrating that we as leaders, because leadership is everything, right? And if we as leaders can demonstrate that we value all of Dominica's children the same, it sends a demonstration to parents, men and women, that they should continue to value all of their children the same, right? Can I proceed, Mr. Speaker?
You can proceed, but focus, stick on the bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for your intervention, Mr. Speaker. No longer, Mr. Speaker, will parents of Dominica be able to complain and talk about equal opportunity and being discriminated against and victimized. Because, Mr. Speaker, understanding that the livelihoods of parents in Dominica and their right to equal access affects their ability to recognize each of their children equally. I think, and what I am saying, Honorable Member, is that this bill addresses that. The fact that we have brought it here, it says that we recognize that we are leading from the front and establishing that these things today will end, Mr. Speaker, and no longer will people be able to use that as weapons to not take care of their children. Because now everybody will have equal access. And every parent who are guardians of Dominica's children will be held responsible, because now nobody has any illegitimate children. And all of Dominica's children are legitimate. And we as administrators, we as legislators recognize that by bringing this bill before the House. Right? So, Mr. Speaker, I welcome the legislation. It is an important step towards promoting legal equity of all children. And I look forward to its implementation and enforcement. It goes without saying, Mr. Speaker, that there will be some challenges, as there might be some loopholes regarding individual children who feel they have been discriminated and how they will go about seeking redress in the future. Of course, we will face some social, political, and practical challenges in its implementation. And of course, the administration alone cannot implement and change the status quo. It needs the help of the community. But this is a step in the right direction. I look forward to the leadership of this country leading the way in ensuring that the rights of all Dominica's children are fully protected and that all Dominica's children are treated equally. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I stand to support the bill on an act to provide for the equal status of children, to remove all discriminatory provisions in the law relating to a child born out of wedlock, and to provide for matters related. This is what we are speaking about. Mr. Speaker, if these bills are tugging at a person's cognitive domain more than the affective domain, we are missing the point. This is not about knowledge and spinning things around. This is about putting the best interest of our children in front. Allow me to use this opportunity to commend the government on the many social net programs which are in place to benefit our children, whether they are born within marriage or out of marriage. I speak about the uniform program, textbook scheme, transportation allowance, school feeding, snack program, free medical care for those under 18, as you heard the Prime Minister outline, transfer fees to secondary school, increased access to early childhood education, special teachers assigned to students with special needs, universal primary and secondary education, free tuition at the Dominica State College, and this is just to name a few. I express gratitude on behalf of the constituents of Cassibrus because all are benefiting from at least one of these programs. Mr. Speaker, if I ask a group of people this question, are children born outside of marriage, usually referred to as children outside of wedlock, the same as children born in wedlock, as it relates to their needs, their welfare, their age level characteristics? The answer would be, of course they are. And I maybe would ask, should these children enjoy the same rights and entitlements? The answer would be, of course. Then I ask the question, can these children inherit their father's estate, or are they entitled to full support from their father? Then the argument begins. Mr. Speaker, this is the argument that this bill seeks to clear once and for all. Mr. Speaker, for too long, children born out of wedlock suffer at the hands of stepmothers, and I've never read a story about the wonderful stepmother, always the wicked stepmother. Grandparents, other relatives, and people in society. These children are called names such as half-brother, half-sister, bastard, and in patois, enfant bata, illegitimate, unlawful. Mr. Speaker, we will address the issue of child abuse in another bill, but just allow me to mention how these names can be a form of mental abuse for these children. This name damages the self-esteem of children, and that is a form of abuse. And we know how children with low self-esteem fight to succeed, and in most cases, they never reach their full potential. They exhibit attention-seeking behavior that many people label as misbehavior or bad manners, when all it is a cry for acceptance. Yes, we knowingly or unknowingly punish children born out of marriage for something that they had no control over. Mr. Speaker, children do not choose the circumstances under which they are born, and this bill gives very clear dispensation as it spells out that a child should not be discriminated against for the mere fact that he or she is born outside of the marriage. Therefore, as a state, we have the responsibility to ensure that these children are taken care of. This bill seeks to provide for the equal status of children and to remove all those names. Because, Mr. Speaker, so often people left out children born out of marriages from benefiting from their father's estate. What this act does is that it abolishes the legal distinction. It abolishes the legal distinction in the status of children born within and outside of marriage. When this act is passed, Mr. Speaker, all children will be children. And so, I here talk about what resources we have. I'm sure if we just pay attention for today, and maybe how far this debate will take us. We will hear some of the provisions that are already in place to ensure that the implementation will go well. The bill seeks to give children born out of wedlock the right to contest their parents' will, receive private life insurance or social security benefits, just like their siblings born within wedlock. Some people may have other thoughts, and they might have other sentiments, but it's really not about you. It's about the child, the best interest of the child. Children, regardless of whether they are born within a marriage or outside a marriage, they have welfare. They should have their welfare adequately provided for. The challenge is here to establish if the man is the father of this child. Because we already know, I was going to say in most cases, but I think in all cases, or in most cases, we already know the woman is the mother. So we want to establish the father. So this is what this bill addresses by providing various methods by which this can be done. Allowance is made for DNA, which can be done if the father is alive or if the father is dead. We can use samples from siblings. The bill explains who is considered as the father of a child, because this is where the issue really lies. And so we already know if you register the child at birth, you are counted as father, but there are other cases that we will determine if this person is father. So the Act spells out all of that. And as we take our time and read through it, we read things like if he was married to the mother of a child at the time of the birth of the child. We will see many other ways in which you'll be considered to be the father. If you sign on consent forms for health services, you sign on consent form for school as father, you sign on report cards, you sign on these records, you have placed yourself in the father position of this child. The person who is alleged to be the father of the child, if he by his conduct, you walk him to school, you walk her to school, you sign, as I said, on health reports, on report cards, then you are considered to be the child father. The bill outlined, and there are lots of other examples that we should take our time and read, because I find it's very reader-friendly, this one. This bill outlines the circumstances under which a person may apply to the court for a declaration of parentage. Mr. Speaker, the court can make the declaration of parentage if it is satisfied that the relationship exists. Mr. Speaker, any declaration of parentage can be revoked. So it can be revoked if the court finds new facts or circumstances after the declaration is made. This act provides guidelines. Mr. Speaker, we're not going to take too long speaking this morning, because everybody excited about that. Everybody's going to have something to say about that. Everybody, one way or the other, was affected by that. Some of us are wishing that was happening 40 years ago, because Mr. Speaker, man, would come out proper. The bill sets out procedure for testing, if you need DNA testing. So this morning, Mr. Speaker, we're not going to take too much time so that all of us can be saying the same thing. That's why I just skip out some of my notes. What I'm saying this morning, despite the prevailing view, children born to unmarried parents are commonplace. Some people think that that's okay, that's common. But these children in that category, they have been treated poorly by both society and the law. So, Mr. Speaker, this bill is very progressive, as it ensures the protection and the promotion of children's rights. And it also lightens the burden of mothers who, in most cases, they have to carry the heavy burden of having to raise children single-handedly. This bill seeks to provide for the vulnerable children. And as we heard from Senator Parrish, children are heritage. If we go through the Bible, God has a lot of things to say about children, to the extent that if you offend one of those little ones, better you tie a stone around your neck and go and drown yourself instead of doing that. So this morning, Mr. Speaker, I think that God is well pleased with us. God is well pleased with this administration and what we are doing here today. And I fully support this bill.
Honorable Charles, I recognize you can proceed.
Mr. Speaker, please permit me to refer to my notes.
Yes, permission granted.
Mr. Speaker, I stand this morning proud and happy to support the Status of Children Act 2023, a bill designed to establish a progressive and visionary framework to tackle the critical issues in our society of child welfare, parentage, and inheritance rights. And Mr. Speaker, why I'm really happy this morning, because I remember growing up in my community where I witnessed cases of children being stigmatized, teased. You don't have a father. Your father doesn't want you. And being powerless and feeling hurt for a respective peer because you could do nothing about it, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I witnessed children being treated differently by even teachers in the classroom, considering those children less than other children, Mr. Speaker. I remember a clear example of two families who live next to each other, fathered by the same man. One was his children in wedlock, and the other, the children were not registered by him, Mr. Speaker. And I remember the difficulties these children endured, Mr. Speaker, and the challenges they had because the mother at the time did not have sufficient income, which we'll deal with in another bill, to support or provide for her children, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, what was more hurtful in some of those cases, even if the father is responsible or it is known that the father had a relationship with the mother, and maybe the father of all, let's say 3 or 5 children, sometimes in some cases, the father would take responsibility for only one child, Mr. Speaker. And you know what used to be most heartbreaking? At times, some of those children would be a carbon copy of the father. And the father would still say, it's not my child. And then the mother, who is suffering now, will verbally abuse that child because the child the child looking too much like the father. So as a child, some children endured serious hardship, emotional and verbal abuse because of that, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, that is why I'm proud today that when I was younger, I did not have the power. But because I'm a part of a visionary, progressive administration, today we have brought this bill to Parliament to address those situations, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, here am I talking about fathers who did not claim their children. But you also have the opposite, where fathers were denied their rights to father children, where men were given, I will say in society, jacket children, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, some fathers, it would have been the only seed they planted on the earth and wanted the responsibility to care for their child. But the mother will say, oh, papa. So, Mr. Speaker, these bills, okay, the mother will say, you're not the father of the child. So even fathers were denied their rights to father their biological children, Mr. Speaker. But this act deals with that today on the section 11, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, and in cases where families struggled, I remember some children having to drop out after primary school, could not attend secondary school because their mother could not afford to send them to secondary school. Whereas the other family, because the children were of wedlock, they were well taken care of, well groomed, they had these opportunities to advance themselves, Mr. Speaker. But that child, some children had to drop out after primary school to go and work to help support their mother to take care of other siblings, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, today justice is being served, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, those children have recourse now and even have rights to claim their inheritance, their rightful inheritance, as you heard in section, I believe, is it 15 of the Act, Mr. Speaker? they can claim their rightful inheritance. Mr. Speaker, section 16 to 18, they can claim their rightful inheritance. So, Mr. Speaker, today, because of the passing of this bill, we will no longer have first class, second class, no class, or bastards in our society. We will all be children with equal rights and access to our inheritance, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I heard the Senator Paris try to throw a cheap shot at the government and talking about equal rights of all Dominican children. But let me educate the Senator Paris that it is the Dominican Labour Party government that ensure that every child in Dominica is not left behind and have equal access to education at all levels, from primary, secondary, universal. It is the Dominican Labour Party when poor Mali were children because their fathers did not register them and their parents were poor and did not have a title to approach a financial institution to get a loan to go and study at a tertiary level. That ensures a graduate per household and place a facility at the aid bank of 3% so any vulnerable child can go there and access that loan to further his or her education. It is the Dominican Labour Party that today is spending $22 million regardless of where you come from, regardless of your surname, regardless of whether your parents accepted you or not.
The Dominican Labour Party administration
Is providing access for all children to advance themselves and achieve their dreams in Dominica. So let the senator let me tell the senator, do not come here when we are discussing a serious bill to correct the ills of our society and use that opportunity to score cheap political points. It is not necessary. This is a bill today that some people will be listening about this act, and healing will be taking place in their lives. Families will be bonding today because of the passage of this bill. We have to understand the pains and sufferings children went through, and today we talk about mental cases, depression. But a lot of those issues were caused by broken homes and homes who could not properly care for their children, households, single parent households. And as I'm on my feet, Mr. Speaker, let me congratulate all the single parents, especially mothers in our society, in those struggling times, tried their best and did their best for their children, Mr. Speaker. And we have many examples in society where children rose above their circumstance, even if they had sugar water to drink when they were going to school, and did well and excelled. And so today, Mr. Speaker, as my Honorable Octavia Alfred said, there are many of us to speak, and I don't want to repeat, but I am proud to be a part of a progressive government that even considers children born by artificial insemination, Mr. Speaker. What a thing today that we are doing in this house, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, today we have given power to the powerless, and I am a very proud member of the Dominican Labour Party administration, and to be in a house today passing a bill which 30 years ago I was powerless to do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Honorable Pinan. Proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I stand in support of the Status of Children's Act. And Mr. Speaker, I also beg your permission to allow me to refer to my notes from time to time.
Permission granted.
But before I proceed, Mr. Speaker, I also beg your favor by allowing me to share my condolences to the family of the late Irving Chillingford, a national hero who hailed from the beautiful village of Dublin in my constituency, Mr. Speaker. Irving lives to mourn his wife, Elizabeth Shillingford, children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. They also had numerous siblings, cousins, and other family, many of which still live in the Dublin village. It remains a great honor in Dublin to be associated with Irving Shillingford. His cricketing legacy is one that is held proudly and dearly in the hearts of the Dublin people. And we will forever be proud to have produced such a talented and inspiring sportsman and national hero, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am proud to stand to support this Status of Children's Act and thus the total removal of any legacy statutes from our old colonial bastardy laws. But Mr. Speaker, to see how far we are going, to see how far this bill takes us, sometimes we have to take a look back to see where we were. In the colonial past, being an illegitimate, or what was referred to as a bastard child, meant that you had no legal standing in society. Bastard, a term still used on the streets today in a derogatory manner, with the intent to dehumanize, to demean and humiliate another person, Mr. Speaker. The insult is meant to make someone feel less than. Whilst we may not always be able to control what is said on the streets, Mr. Speaker, with this act, however, we will now and forever remove any significance in law to referring to someone as being illegitimate or a bastard. Mr. Speaker, what did it mean to be illegitimate or a bastard child? According to the old English common law, bastard children were no one's child. This meant that they could not take or make any claim on their parents for support, nor was anyone indebted or responsible for their care and upbringing. These children often had to rely on the mercies of monasteries and later on the parishes for their upkeep. It was not until years later, centuries later, that fathers were given some responsibility to be financially responsible for their bastard children, Mr. Speaker. So imagine that in today's Dominica, a country like ours, where a majority of our children are being born outside of marriage, that means the majority of our population would not be legally entitled to financial support from their fathers and would also have no claim to their father's estate. Mr. Speaker, 81% of the children born in my constituency were born outside of marriage. It would be scary to imagine that such a large number of our beloved children in my constituency would have been fatherless and without any social standing in society, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we note also that this bill reaches well beyond our currently young children. Many of us adults were in fact born outside of marriage and are therefore also subject to the rights and protections being offered under this bill. Under the old bastardy laws, I would not be Darren Pinard. I would not have been able to carry my father's name, Mr. Speaker. Whilst he doesn't have much to leave behind, I also would not have been able to benefit at all from any of his estate, since I was the firstborn and the only one born outside of his marriage. We can easily see that these old laws undoubtedly would have led to a failed society. We would be a country with exorbitant crime rate, lawlessness, and chaos. But even worse, Mr. Speaker, we would be what could be described as a heartless society. With this act, we become a gentler and more caring society, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Part 1, Section 4 of this act removes any legal distinction between children born inside or outside of marriage. All children, regardless of circumstances, are equal under this act. Mr. Speaker, this law also brings us into compliance with the international treaties such as Article 25 of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that, I quote, all children, whether born in or out of wedlock, shall enjoy the same social protection, end quote. The bill presented, therefore, in every material respect ensure that the highest level of rights to every one of our precious children is granted, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is this and other such similar acts that serve to ensure that a majority of our population are bestowed the full protections and rights available to all persons in line with the absolute highest international human rights. The act is one that should undoubtedly be celebrated by everyone in this country. And Mr. Speaker, the act not only establishes the equal rights of all our children, but in Section 10, it also provides the right for essentially anyone to apply to the court for a declaration of parentage within reason, of course. A man, as outlined by Honorable Charles, a man who suspects, with good reason, of course, that he may be the father of a child, can apply to the court to be so confirmed and legally recognized as the father of that child. Also, a person may apply to be recognized as the biological child of a man who is suspected to be her father. So, Mr. Speaker, let's just say that there have been circumstances where there might have been some confusion as to the paternity of a child, leading to that child probably growing up without a father. However, in our small society, things do not always stay hidden or under the covers. So you might have heard rumors, or you might have a striking resemblance to somebody. So under this act, you have now the ability to apply to the court to have said person tested and have your paternity either confirmed or refuted, Mr. Speaker. In such a case, the court would direct that a testing procedure is carried out, and if the potential father refuses to carry out the test, then the court can use even that information to come to its own conclusion in deciding whether or not that person might have to be recognized as the child's father. The great thing about that, Mr. Speaker, is that when a man is legally recognized to be a child father, he will then go on to enjoy the same rights and access and privileges to that child as the biological mother has, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, in this, as with everything we note that this Dominican Labour Party administration does, it is in the best interest of our most vulnerable citizens. And we are not in this business to embarrass anybody. So in Part 4 of the Act, there is assurances that any proceedings held and such similar proceedings will be in a closed court, and the court would prohibit any publishing of information without its authority. So we have to make sure that these proceedings do not go on to embarrass any child. Imagine that maybe you applied to confirm whether a man was your biological father and the results are false. It could be a little bit embarrassing, but we do not want to deter anybody from submitting that application, so these proceedings would be matter of held in confidential setting, Mr. Speaker. So what this act does, Mr. Speaker, is to increase both recognition and accountability between a parent and a child. And I am pleased to be part of this progressive Dominican Labour Party administration for bringing this act before this honorable house, Mr. Speaker. An act that has the power to bring families together and to ensure that our children are well cared for and that we live in a more caring, a more just, a more human society, Mr. Speaker. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I recognize Honorable Frederick. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand briefly to support the bill for an act to provide equal status of children and to remove all of the discriminatory provisions in our existing laws. And I'm indeed happy that we appear to have a colleague on the other side who is willing to take on the kind of cause. But to say, by the question and the tone of the question regarding the Kainago status, it appears that there is a subtle level of discrimination in the tone of the voice. And in so doing, it kind of gets away from the meat of the matter. Because we are here speaking to rights that are international. And if we pull out the Kainago piece, or the Rasta piece, or any other piece, we may well be creating discrimination among children. So it appears that discrimination in every sense of the word is a clear separation of people based on their religion, their race, the color of their skin, etc. And so it is important that this critical piece of legislation is so important, because what it does, it creates an equal opportunity across the line. And so for many moons, yes, there have been levels of discrimination against people of indigenous heritage. But I could safely say that if you want to know more about that situation, a simple drive to the Kainago space, an interaction with some of the folks who are their children who have been able to access all of the trappings of the education program meted out by this administration that I'm very proud to be part of, you will clearly understand that children have been able to benefit across the board within the Kainago space. And more importantly, even to the fact that we are able to, per capita, muster the largest number of university graduates per capita. And so we have to be very careful. Well, I like the cause, I like the partnership and the taking of that particular, because I would like you to be very careful, Honorable Senator Paris, because you did call me out. You did call me out. I don't like to be called out, but you did call me out. And so this piece of legislation is part of I just want to, you want a clarification, a bit of education, yes? There's what we call the UN DRIPS, which is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And what it intends to do is to create all of that. And it appears in the laws that we've been doing across the board in Dominica that we are in tandem with the UN DRIPS. And so the people who are out there speaking about the rights and the government not able to celebrate the rights of indigenous people, it appears they clearly misunderstand the laws that exist within our country. And even our constitution makes it clear that every citizen within that particular space is afforded that right. And the government of the Dominican Labour Party have, for recent history in the last 20 years, been able to deal with all of the trappings of discrimination. And I will tell you, though trappings of it exist, we are very mindful that in the general scheme of things, we do ensure that the people of Kainago heritage and Kainago descent do get, as we say, a piece of the pie. And so we will continue to remain equal citizens in our country, and we will not be victims, or will not accept the subtle levels of discrimination that some of us may try to insert in a conversation as we seek to build our climate resilient country, build our first international airport, and all of those wonderful things that we can do as a nation. So Mr. Speaker, thanks for the opportunity to share, and I'm inviting the Senator Paris into this space, and we could do a wonderful, we can create a new narrative, a new understanding of what it is that defines Kainago people and their space within the white equivalent society. Thank you very much.
Honorable Blackmore.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to support this very progressive bill before this honorable House this morning. And me too, as the Prime Minister did earlier on, quite rightly so, because this bill and the other bills that were presented or introduced thus far by the both honorable ministers are part of the culmination of tremendous hard work that have been done in the past to get us to the level that we're now at. And I know you have referred to Mr. Martin. I can recall when we started doing the consultation for all those bills many years ago. I want to also take this opportunity to commend the drafters within the Aegis Chambers, the Attorney General, and some of those who are not here with us today, the past Minister, Honorable Douglas, Your Excellency Francine Barron, the Attorney General, and yours truly, who chaired, and also the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Legal Affairs and National Security, who served as the Secretary to that committee. Mr. Speaker, a new day is dawn in this wonderful country. Insofar as our legislative framework is concerned and actually improving the legislative framework. And the Prime Minister quite rightly made reference to the national reset, which must not be given a one-dimensional connotation to what it actually means, therefore. But a national reset also entails breaking down, dismantling, tearing down, therefore saying, Mr. Speaker, and building new things, and replacing also, and reconstructing also, Mr. Speaker. And in retrospect, Mr. Speaker, in retrospect, this bill that we are now debating should have passed in Parliament long time ago, Mr. Speaker.
I know we the Creole language, but we need to interpret. Yes.
Once you're wearing glasses, you're very bright. And then maybe that is, yes, yes. And I know that is really, when you become a doctor, you start wearing glasses too. Irrespective whether you have 20/20 vision or not, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, The other issue, Mr. Speaker, which is of critical importance, and if you go back to section 16 to section 18, Mr. Speaker, because Senator Parrish did not read the bill, and he stood up there, and when he realized that he was making a mistake, sorry, Mr. Speaker, a mistake, Mr. Speaker, he tried to make a comeback. But sometimes when you so far down the wicket, you still have to come back, you'll get stamped out, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, if he refers to section 16 to 18, that speaks to the disposition of property, income, gift, you realize that a child, notwithstanding the fact that that child may be born out of wedlock, Mr. Speaker, has equal rights. And further, Mr. Speaker, that the executor or the administrator has to honestly search and to inquire that you have people, namely children, who may have interest in the estate of the parent. Well catalogued and well inscribed in the proposed measure before this honorable house, Mr. Senator, you're a scientist, an engineer, and science is based on research and observation. We have to observe to come to a conclusion. And Mr. Speaker, the other issue that is of critical importance, because this bill, I'm going to be very short, has far-reaching implications and ramifications. And it's important, therefore, for all of us to understand our rights as parents and our rights as children. Mr. Speaker, you have, and I really like, Mr. Speaker, the doctrine of implied repeal of this intended measure, which, Mr. Speaker, effectively repeals, Mr. Speaker, the Infant Protection Act. But of course, it serves the vital orders within that piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker. And it is critical. And why I say this is critical, Mr. Speaker? Because our current laws, Mr. Speaker, does not view the right of the father the same way it views the right of the mother. And what does that mean, therefore? It means, therefore, Mr. Speaker, in simply layman's terms, that the parental or parentage authority, Mr. Speaker, resides in that of the mother alone. And it means, therefore, that the father, Mr. Speaker, can only get custody of that child if the mother relinquishes that custody to adoption, if that mother is deemed to be unfit, Mr. Speaker, etc., etc. So that is a progressive piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker. Well thought of, well intended, Mr. Speaker. That is why we have to ensure, as a responsible government, that we took our time to look at all the relevant pieces of legislation and to ensure that when we come to Parliament, that that law or the intended law suits our current times and is therefore responsive to our current needs going forward, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, there's something else I want to reference. And reference was made to that. There are times you go to court, and I can recall being a young police officer, the only officer station I worked for 3 weeks before I came to CID was in St. Joseph. We had a very, very serious lay magistrate, I shall not call his name, because the laws of the house does not permit me so to do. And whenever you had, issues where a mother took a man, and I say man because most times the women are, in fact, we mustn't hide our head under the sand. The women most times are, in fact, the victims. You have instances where men make application, but in most instances, because our society is still endlessly male-ordered, Mr. Speaker. So the magistrate will ask them, the man who says, not my child. And the magistrate asks you, did you pass there? Did you pass there? The man says, yes, I passed there a few times. He says, Zanfan, I say, child. Child is yours. That now codifies the authority and the power of the court, Mr. Speaker, to give directive to ensure or requiring a father, wherever a mother, to go to do the medical procedure test, we call it paternity test, to find out. I know of a story, Mr. Speaker, that a mother gave birth to twins. And the father claimed one. He said, one is mine, one is not mine, Mr. Speaker. I'm not a medical doctor, but you're laughing. Those are the realities. And that is what we are trying to close. Because a child did not ask us to come on this earth. We, by our own actions and intention, whether we were drunk, whether we were sue, Mr. Speaker, and we say we did something and a child come, you have to ensure that you take care of that child too, Mr. Speaker. And that is seeking to reverse that and to put the welfare of that child first and foremost, Mr. Speaker. So, he said one was his, one was not his. They both looking alike, and Mr. Speaker, but that now will change that, and the court will be able to determine, based on the results of that technical and medical testing, Mr. Speaker, that that child belongs to whoever, and to rule in favor of the child, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to say these few words because, and not to be long, because I think the introduction of the bill, and Mr. Speaker, as I said, this series of bills that we have before this honorable house must be taken seriously in this country as a manifestation by this Labour administration to continue to preserve and to uphold the welfare and well-being of our young children, the vulnerable groups, which includes sometimes, and some most cases, parents also, guardians, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I support this measure before this honorable house, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank immensely the members of the House who have given their full support to this bill, that is the Status of Children Bill. I must confess I expected no differently. As I wind up this debate, I wish to emphasize just two things. That the purpose of the soon-to-be enacted law, which would be a first for Dominica, is to address in law the matter of equality and social acceptance of children and to remove all discriminatory provisions in our laws relating to a child born out of wedlock. We all agree that there are children born out of wedlock, but why should we discriminate against them? Two, I wish to also state that the newly anticipated Status of Children Act supports one of Dominica's obligations under the United Nations Conventions, particularly on the matter of state obligation to help ensure the registration of children and that they are cared for by their parents. Mr. Speaker, the societal impact of this bill is far-reaching and largely positive. I wish again to commend this bill for passage into law.
This concludes the debate. It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Status of Children Act 2023 be read a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. The bill will now stand to Mr. James. Mr. James.
Read it. Status of Children Act 2023.
The bill now stands to a committee of the whole House to be considered clause by clause. The question is that I do report the bill to the House. House resume, and I have to report that the bill shortly entitled Status of Children Act has passed the committee stage with amendments. The question is that the report of the committee on the bill be adopted. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the bill shortly entitled Status of Children Act 2023 be read a third time and passed.
Second.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
It has been moved and seconded that the bill shortly entitled Status of Children Act 2023 be read a third time and pass. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Status of Children Act 2023.
The bill has been read a third time and passed accordingly.
Mr. Speaker, I move the second reading of the bill shortly entitled Maintenance of Children Act 2023.
Seconded, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the maintenance bill before the House is intended to provide for a law relating to the maintenance of children and to bring the law of Dominica into conformity with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Article 7 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, CRC, which Dominica ratified on March 13, 1991, states, "The child shall be registered immediately after birth and shall have the right from birth to a name, the right to acquire a nationality, and as far as possible, the right to know and be cared for by his or her parents." Part of being cared for is providing reasonable maintenance for the child. Mr. Speaker, the existing law in Dominica relating to maintenance of children is the Maintenance Act of 1982, which thereafter received a relatively minor amendment, one of which reflects access to a child. The maintenance of children within our Dominican and Caribbean societies has often been a contentious and a troublesome issue, and one which has generated much discussions. Many of us are all too familiar with cases in our communities where fathers and mothers in some instances have defaulted on their duty and responsibility to provide adequate care and support for their children. These cases often are subject to court proceedings, leading to resentment, which can last a lifetime. Such cases not only relate to maintenance matters, but also custody of children. We are likely to know of cases where children are caught in the middle of disputes between parents, with the result that these children are alienated from their parents with deep hatred and animosity. Mr. Speaker, our children suffer the most in these circumstances, and their well-being, their entire childhoods are sometimes compromised. The government of Dominica recognizes and embraces its responsibility to protect our children and ensure that laws are adequate to mandate that parents fulfill their legal obligation to provide financially for their children. Mr. Speaker, the court should not be the primary avenue to resolve disputes and make maintenance orders. Individuals should be cognizant of their responsibilities and so fulfill these outside a court hearing. However, the court is always available for redress. The bill, which is presented in 4 parts, also seeks to reform the law relating to the maintenance of children. The preliminary and interpretation provisions are contained in clauses 1 to 2. Part 1, maintenance orders, clauses 4 to 15. Clause 4, obligation to maintain a child. The primary responsibility to maintain a child rests with both parents. The maintenance bill specifies that each parent of a child has the obligation to provide reasonably for the child's maintenance, whether or not the child is in that parent's custody, meaning, Mr. Speaker, whether they live with the parents or not. The fact that a child does not reside with the parent does not mean that the child is disqualified from receiving maintenance. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the number of children a parent has also does not eliminate the responsibility to maintain every child simply because there are too many children to receive support. However, Mr. Speaker, in deciding whether to exercise its powers under this Part 1 of the bill, the court shall have regard to all the circumstances of the case, including the income earning capacity, property, and other financial resources which each parent or any other person is obligated to. Other considerations include financial needs of the child and the standard of living of the child, among others, like the physical or mental capacity of the child and the standard of living enjoyed by the family while the parents and child resided together. Similarly, Clause 5 addresses the matter of maintenance orders. Such orders can be made by the court requiring a parent or any other person who also has an obligation to do so maintain the child. There are instances in Dominica where the child may not necessarily reside with the parent, but this does not mean that the parent is exonerated from maintaining the child. The bill, Mr. Speaker, also accounts for the maintenance of children who are in the care of a guardian and has accepted the legal responsibility for that child. The bill makes provision for the court to consider an application by a parent, a child over 14 years on his own behalf, or by a person on behalf of a child, to have the responsible parent maintain the child to which he or she has an obligation. Mr. Speaker, the present bill covers the payments of maintenance orders in respect to periodic payments for a specified term, payments of expenses related to a child's birth, and the prenatal care of the child, as well as provision of non-monetary maintenance and care of a child. Where the court orders the payment of a weekly sum, the sum shall not be less than $75 weekly. Clause 12, attachment order in relation to pension. Mr. Speaker, is a very interesting one. As for the first time, attachment orders would be enshrined in legislation and better facilitate the payment of maintenance. The court may make an attachment order in respect of any pension or income that is capable of being attached, directing the person paying the pension or income to periodically deduct a sum of maintenance and to pay that sum to the collections officer at the court. Mr. Speaker, an attachment order must contain a penal notice notifying the person ordered to make the deduction and subsequent payment that he or she will be personally liable for the payment if he or she fails to make the deduction in compliance with the attachment order. Part 2, clauses 16 to 21, makes provision for mediators and family experts to assist the court. Clause 16, list of mediators. Mediators recognized by the High Court as being qualified can be called upon to assist parties once proceedings commence. Where a mediation agreement has been concluded, the mediator shall file the mediation agreement with the court. Clause 20, services of persons other than social workers. In the event the court requires the services of a social worker or family law expert, the court may utilize the services of any person whose qualifications are at least equivalent to those in the case of a probation officer, or who, in the opinion of the court, is qualified as a family law expert. Part 3, enforcement, clauses 22 to 28. This refers to the designation of collections officers who would receive and make a record of all payments directed to be made to or through the court. Moreover, the bill establishes a robust enforcement mechanism to ensure that maintenance payments are made as directed under the law. This includes the designation of a collections officer who will receive and record all payments, as well as power assigned to the court to issue warrants when payments are in arrears of 14 days and over. The provisions of this enforcement clause send a clear message that under the law there will be no tolerance regarding the neglect of children's welfare. The court, in cases of default in payment, also has the option of having a person be committed to intermittent custody to prison for any period not exceeding 2 months unless the sum due under the order and costs of commitment are paid. Clause 25. Among other measures, this clause enables the court to prevent a person from leaving the state to avoid complying with the maintenance order. Part 4, miscellaneous matters, clauses 29 to 33. An appeal shall lie in respect of an order under this Act to the Court of Appeal. Aggrieved parties could seek redress in the event of dissatisfaction with the order of the court. Mr. Speaker, when parents live up to their obligations to child maintenance, it can make a significant difference in the lives of families. The goal of child support is to divide the costs associated with raising a child or children fairly between parents. The Maintenance Act will provide a framework for this to be done in the best interest of the child and all parties. Mr. Speaker, the Maintenance Act is intended to secure the safety, security, and well-being of all children, to ensure they are not disadvantaged and that they have access to the best opportunities for quality care, shelter, education, and long-term happiness. Mr. Speaker, the Maintenance of the Children Bill is testament to our unwavering commitment to the children of the Commonwealth of Dominica. This bill will provide a brighter future for our youth and in turn our beloved nation. Let us unite in our efforts to ensure that no child is left behind and together build a stronger, more prosperous Dominica. Mr. Speaker, I commend the bill to this honorable House. Thank you.
The bill is before the House for debate. Yes, Senator.
Mr. Speaker, may I refer to my notes?
Not me, you asked for permission?
Can I refer to my notes, please?
Yes, permission granted.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to lend my support to the Maintenance of Children Bill. As a woman, a mother, a decision maker, how could I not want to be part of a decision which would improve the lives of children of this country? What stood out for me was Part 3 of the bill, where mediators and family experts are included in the process to avoid the ugly battles in court. We are really putting the children first and safeguarding their innocence even in a broken family. Mr. Speaker, as we turn this bill into law, we must look at each situation, each decision holistically and beneficially, not in isolation. It does not stand alone. It is part of a bigger issue that we are all trying to solve. We must put into perspective to ensure that the children's lives are better as they relate to the family. The maintenance of children in this economy is not for the faint of heart. I am a mother of 2 young children, Mr. Speaker. Trust me. When I say it's not easy, it is not. Them picking nigger, they're expensive. That means the children are expensive to maintain. Picking nigger. So when I dissect the bill, and I know that in Part 2, Section 5, and I quote, where the court orders the payment of a weekly sum, the sum shall not be less than $75 weekly, I was like, eh. Mr. Speaker, 112-ounce Similac milk, for those who don't know, that's a type of milk for babies, $41.40, 12 ounces like this. And you do not want to know the price of diapers. How can we maintain a child with $75 a week, $10.71 a day in 2023? Take into consideration the inflated prices. Our inflation rate is 0.52%. This is just not enough to cover basic food. I said, that's what we have to do. Imagine, Honorable Charles. We have not considered doctor visits, medication, and their other necessities. The children have to go swimming, they have football, they have basketball, they have all kinds of things. These little people are important with wants and needs, and we must, Honorable Charles, when you go to court and I bring my good lawyer and we start minimum, and she stick to $75 with me, what can you do? We have to consider, a father goes to court, Honorable Member. I refer to it in the bill. I know, I'm very aware. I have a proposal here, Mr. Okay, so put it in my speech. I have it here, I have my proposal here. I have it right here, Mr. Honorable Member for Bakers and Senator Blackmore and Honorable Member for Port Michelle. Yes. These little people are important with wants and needs, and we must cater to them. We must look at the weekly payments in this changing environment. We know that $75 is just not enough. So where is the rest of the money coming from? What is the state doing to assist? And what does the state plan to do to assist? I don't see it in the bill, but I have my recommendations. To whom does the responsibility lie? Mr. Speaker, we have another issue here, which we need to take into consideration and focus on as we seek to support our children in the best way possible. Are the parents ordered to make these payments gainfully employed? What are they doing? What are they into? And how are they earning an income? We see apartments going up everywhere. People in the apartments with no job. How can they pay the $75? The unemployment rate in Dominica is frightening, Mr. Speaker, 23%. I am certain that some of these parents, Mr. Speaker, would like to make their payments to court regularly and on time, but they are just not able to do so. There are individuals who still default on their payments of maintenance of children's support through the court office. Some people...
And that's the excuse to every society. That we give men and some women that kind of...
Mr. Speaker, what is that, Mr. Speaker?
You
Is that a point of order?
justify it.
Mr. Speaker, not aware of what's going on.
Mr. Speaker,
Excuse me.
what is that?
Yes, yes, the members wanted to stand on a point of order, but the mic at the front is not working properly. So, Honorable Deputy, switch with Honorable Charles, make a point. But PM cannot think it.
Is somebody standing on a point of order or everybody's just talking? What's going on, Mr. Speaker?
Just 1 sec, we have a challenge, a technical challenge.
But you can stand and speak politely. I can sit. Let me sit.
Yes, Honorable Charles.
The Honorable Senator was raising the matter of the $75 weekly, which he said was insufficient. So I was waiting to hear a counter proposal, Mr. Speaker. She went on into an area that is not relevant to the legislation bill before us. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a serious bill about maintenance of children, and we have to factor the circumstances of everyone. And the bill makes provision that the court has a right to assess the assets of the parent or the individual.
So your point is the relevance, the issue is the relevance.
Talking about unemployed people and people being given apartments.
Yes.
It
Yes.
even talks about people's ability to be employed.
Yeah, point taken. Point taken. So, Honorable Senator is pointing, she have indicated, the Honorable Minister have indicated that the issue of relevance in regards to the bill, you know? Because if we have to go in all directions to explain, but not focus on the bill, then we have a problem. And we're opening ourselves later to challenges, and that might create a breakdown in the debate. So let's stay focused on the bill. Proceed, but focus on the bill.
Mr. Speaker, some people are unable to afford the payments. That's the relevance, due to their financial difficulties. A grave problem occurs when someone is not able to help their child because they can't afford it. So here we are, Mr. Speaker, Senator Reid is speaking, asking for more for each child weekly. This is a fair request. As we reset, we need to create jobs, Mr. Speaker. The youth, they're stressed out. They would like to mind their children, Mr. Speaker, but may not be able to do so. Mr. Speaker, here is another important factor we consider when we speak about the maintenance of children. Imagine paying maintenance for your child, who is now 10 years old, to the court since she was 1, and to then find out that you were supporting the child of another person. You are ordered to do a DNA test. The DNA test results show 0% markers of the child as it relates to your DNA. The baby is not yours. What now? How is this addressed? We need to consider and amend this bill to include the mandatory DNA testing of every baby from birth, be it from married parents or not. Yes. I mean, let's be realistic here. Married or not, it needs to be done. As we reset, let us prevent a difficult situation from happening. In a situation like this, our children are the ones most affected. Let us avoid the emotional damage that this can cause to them. The children, not us, the children. Let us avoid situations like this, which can lead to domestic violence, a bill that we will address later today. Mandatory DNA testing is necessary. Mr. Speaker, my recommendations for this bill are as follows. We need to look at the weekly payment per child in its entirety. We are now $10.71. I'm proposing $15 a day. We start small, brings us to 105. We need to include mandatory DNA testing of every child at birth, whether the baby is from marriages or not. As we, not for me, my children have, no, Mr. We reset, let's reset. Let's not do things in isolation, but holistically, considering the whole child, the whole family, and a functioning community, where our children can grow, thrive, and be good human beings. Test the children from birth, Mr. Speaker. This will avoid some fathers from paying child support to children that are not theirs. Okay, this is not for me, my Mr. Speaker. If it bothers you, I'm sorry, but these are my recommendations on the bill, and I stand by my recommendations. I thank you.
Mr. Speaker.
I recognize you, Honorable Prime Minister. Proceed.
Mr. Speaker, my caution to us in this House is that we should not trivialize these very sacred and important issues. We have to be careful in the society that there's people like to talk about rights. These are my rights. But what is the most important thing that's missing in society is an important word called responsibility. And we have to be careful that we don't keep giving people excuses for the way they behave. You can be as financially poor as you may be. That does not take away your responsibility. You can be as rich as you are. That doesn't take away your responsibility. And we have to be careful with this constant effort or push to give excuses and justifications. If you are unable to provide for your children, the court understands that, you know. If tonight you have time entirely. Excuses, Mr. Speaker, for those responsibilities. So I think, unfortunately, I think the senator has a penchant of trivializing things, and we have to be careful with that, senator. This is not MySpace and IG and Facebook and social media, Mr. Speaker. This is the part. The thing, Mr. Speaker, is this. We know in society sometimes the parent gets the money and it's not being used on the child. So you're getting the money, the child is not at school because the child has no breakfast, the child has no shoes, but you got the money. So we put in the legislation to ensure that when you get the money, you use it for the purpose intended. So when All of those things will be taken into consideration by the appropriate authority, and a determination will be made whether it is $200 a month, whether it is 500, whether it is 3, whether it is 250. That will be a determination by the courts, Mr. Speaker. But this is an important piece of legislation, and I think it will play with the supervision. More, we cannot tie the state's responsibility to a parental responsibility. We cannot compare parents and say parents will to pay. We fund to the care and the child's fundamental right. From birth. Long. You already spend too much time on social media. But the main point I want to make, Mr. Speaker, is this. We can make suggestions, because it's a societal response to this. We all have to play our part. But let us please, I beseech you on the other side, do not trivialize this matter. We talk about the welfare of the most impressionable minds in our society. People who cannot take care of themselves. People who cannot speak for themselves. People who cannot stand for themselves. We have a duty and an obligation as leaders, to protect these children and to ensure that every child in our country has the opportunity to live peaceful, healthy, productive lives, that they do not have to scrunt and struggle for the basic needs. Understand, we have many parents in this country, Mrs. Smith. When I encounter people every day, and one lady has 5, 6, 7 children to care for, and the fellows are not playing their part. We understand the huge challenge of this. It's not easy. It's not easy. And I think we have to be careful about trivializing this matter. Let's make concrete suggestions. But let's not, because the government brings in, yes, I support, but, this and that. That's not how we have to go about it. So I want to caution for the other bills that will be coming in. If you have prepared notes, please throw these notes away. And start your new script, Mr. Speaker. New script. Constructive. I'm not telling you to be constructive. But But Senator, no DNA, no compulsory DNA test at birth, or at no time, except if the court deems that it necessary to have this DNA done, or if both consenting parents decide that they would like to have a DNA done on their child. But mandatory DNA would be a violation of the rights of a child, complete violation of the rights of a child. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Honorable Lockett, make Honorable Lockett go first.
Mr. Speaker, what a time to be alive. And this is what you call something else. I rise to give my full support to the bill before the House for debate. And I ask your permission, Mr. Speaker, to refer to my notes from time to time.
Permission granted.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I've had the opportunity to engage parents in different forums, be it at work and, parenting sessions, which I've done many of. And whenever issues relating to child disagreement between parents come up, I always say to them two things. Two parents who have a child together do not have the luxury of not talking to each other. And when two parents fight, the child suffers. The conversation surrounding child maintenance is quite contentious. And while it is men, Mr. Speaker, who are predominantly the culprits, women also are known to abandon their responsibilities. Your children did not ask to be born. When two consenting adults produce an offspring, the responsibility to provide adequate care falls squarely on both parents through the developmental stages until that child becomes an adult. Mr. Speaker, the practice where one parent feels that it's okay to go MIA, go missing in action, and abdicates their responsibilities, while one parent is left to carry the burden of child rearing, is a growing concern. Unfortunately, when this happens, some parents are not able to adequately address the needs of that child. A solid and intact family structure can have a significantly positive impact on a child's present and future well-being and offers countless benefits for both adults and children, and by extension, the country. This by no means, Mr. Speaker, indicates that parents who no longer have a romantic relationship should stay just for the sake of the child. What it implies is a healthy relationship between both parents where each contributes to the holistic development of the child will have a positive impact. Mr. Speaker, being a single parent is a challenging task. This legislation is correcting an injustice that many parents in Dominica are presently facing. No parent should be allowed to walk away from their responsibilities, walk away from their obligations, and this act is ensuring that this will not continue. It mandates that each parent is obligated to provide reasonably for the child's maintenance, whether or not the child is in the parent's custody. This includes, Mr. Speaker, half our stepchildren, who we sometimes call outside child. In some cases, Mr. Speaker, internal pressures within the household restrict our parents, and usually men, by the women, from providing and interacting with this outside child, Mr. Speaker. Section 7G of this bill speaks to maintaining the standard of living enjoyed by the family while the parents and child reside together. We have seen repeatedly situations where families fall into hardship after one parent, again, usually the man, moves out. Financial support becomes irregular and does not come in at all, while the focus is placed on the new home. The situation worsens when step-siblings live within that household. And it is common that parents often invest fewer resources in children to whom they are not biologically related. The presence of half-siblings can sometimes alter the family environment through an uneven distribution of resources, as well as the division of resources to support children residing outside of the household. Mr. Speaker, there are several sections of this bill, but in keeping to my promise to be short, I would highlight one other section, that's section 13 of the Act, which states that a party whose financial information is necessary to determine the amount of maintenance shall, and on the request of the court, present to the court any financial information, and that information, any person needed to give evidence of financial information may be summoned before the court. Essentially, Mr. Speaker, it is saying that parents cannot hide their money to avoid child maintenance. Provisions have been made by law to examine the finances of non-contributing parents to determine the amount of maintenance. Mr. Speaker, it is shameful. It is shameful. People that can actually afford are shirking their responsibilities. I mean, Maguisa, they can afford, and we know them. We know them. Mr. Speaker, this is a strong legislation. It will certainly change the approach of parenting. Parents have a legal responsibility to provide financially to their children, even if they no longer live with them. And it's unfortunate that the government has to enact laws in order for parents to support their children. But it is important that we do so to save a future generation. Ideally, even when this legislation is enacted, it will be best that the number of child maintenance cases in the court reduced. Parents fighting in court about whether or not to make their children a priority can be quite embarrassing and shameful, and not only to the parents, Mr. Speaker, but to the innocent child between. This part of the children's memory will never erase. The children begin to question their worth and whether their parents even wanted them to be here. If parents are having a hard time agreeing and compromising, they can process the maintenance through regular bank transfers, through their lawyers, maybe through their village councils, social welfare divisions, and at each of these places, proper records are kept. In conclusion, and most important to note, parents' involvement in the life of their child goes beyond financial support. A child's basic needs, physical needs, intellectual needs, and spiritual guidance, and love and belonging, firstly come from their parents. It is only when parents are unable to provide and cope that the state should be involved. And Mr. Speaker, the state gets involved quite frequently because there's almost a growing trend, especially among young mothers, where they come to you and they say, the child has no father. But Mr. Speaker, we know of only one Immaculate Conception, and it will never happen again. It will never happen again. The Father is out there somewhere. I lost track. Yeah. Anyway. So, Mr. Speaker, it is my hope that we will see a drastic improvement in the care of our Dominican children when this legislation is passed. And with these few words, Mr. Speaker, I give my full and unequivocal support to this bill. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House be suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.
Your mic.
Seconded,
Yes.
Mr. Speaker.
It has been moved and seconded that the House be suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. House stands suspended until 3 p.m.
Mr. Speaker,